What I'm referring to is the fact that, listen, there is still a death that needs to take place in our lives. And Jesus, in the moment of the cross, he teaches us how to follow him through death and out the other side. Into life. To the full. And that's what Paul is keying in on here in the book of Galatians. Again, he goes on, he continues to say, he says, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I now live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. So if Paul, living in this moment when he wrote this, right, he's saying, I've been crucified with Christ. Well, what the heck is he talking about? Like, dude, you said you're talking about death here, but you're alive writing this. What does that even mean? If he's alive, then what was he referring to about death? And he writes later, in Galatians 5, verse 24, he says, those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. What are we to crucify and put to death? The flesh. There was a whole sermon on the flesh back in our war series when we talked about the world, the flesh, and the devil, right? The three enemies of the soul. Okay, so I would encourage you, if you're not remembering what the flesh is, go back and watch that and be reminded of that. Because Paul says we're supposed to put to death our flesh. Our selfish passions and desires that we place over God and his desires in our lives. When we put to death our flesh, Paul says we come alive. Right after this, he talks about, so keep in step with the Spirit. When you put to death yourself, you walk in the Spirit. You walk in Jesus, in the ways of Jesus. Okay? He says when we put to death our flesh, our selfish desires, our passions, we come alive. Because desire, although it is a great motivator, it is a terrible master. When you have to do what you want to do, that's the problem, right? That's the problem. Just ask anyone who's struggling with addiction or pornography addiction. When you have to do what you want to do all the time, that's the problem. Our desires, okay? Great motivators, but they are terrible masters. It's a terrible master. And if we are run by our desires, it wouldn't necessarily be all bad. Some of us have really good desires, okay? Some of us, like, we see that, like, old commercial. We don't watch commercials anymore. Anyone here watch? We see that old commercial of, like, when the puppies come on, you know, in the arms of an angel, right? We see that and we're like, breaks my heart. I want to adopt all the dogs. And then some of you do, right? I'm not saying our desires are not necessarily all bad, except we all know that our desires can be chaotic and contradictory and deceitful, and sometimes they can lead us to good things, and sometimes they can lead us right off of a cliff. Friends, there is a deep happiness and contentment and calmness that come over those who have died to self, to those who put their desires to death, or at least in their proper place below God. And as a result, they become transformed and set free from the dominion of want. When we deny ourselves and follow Jesus, we find ourselves motivated by love. By love. When we deny ourselves and we pick up that cross, literally the symbol of that sacrificial love, right? Also a symbol of a gruesome, grotesque death, but in the moment of Jesus and who he is, also a beautiful symbol of sacrificial love. We're motivated by love. God's love. A love that is unattached to the outcome and freely given. A love that isn't concerned with what I want or what I can get out of it, but rather a greater love. To lay down one's life for the life of a friend. A love that denies the self and picks up a cross.